77b, middle of the page, 2 dots. He b'seich beisa. Okay, what did the Mishnah say? The Mishnah says that if his house, it doesn't work unless he throws it into her basket or into her bosom. Amar Ula says, if he throws it into her house, she has to be next to her house or next to her courtyard. Rav Ashi says, even if she is in Tveria and her courtyard is in Tzipori, which are quite a distance from each other. The Mishnah says you have to be in your house. This is what the Mishnah means to say. Since her property is sort of secured, i.e., she locked the door, let's say, and he put the divorce into the slot, the mail slot, that's sufficient. She doesn't actually have to be there. Okay. Now, according to one opinion, she does have to be there. Let's say this is the debate. What is the reason why your chutz, your property, acquires things on your behalf? Why is it that if somebody throws a coupon into your mail slot, we consider it yours, or any other gift for that matter? So it could be that this is the debate. This is a famous debate that takes place in goes throughout Talmud. Why does your property acquire things on your behalf? Is it because of yad or because of shliach? Yoda means it's an extension of your hand. Just like if you picked up something with the intention of acquiring it, you acquire it. Your property is one big hand of yours because you own it. The other version is mishum shlichus. It's as if it's your messenger. Now, just like with regard to the Gemara wants to say that if you say the reason of chutzar, the reason why your property acquires things on your behalf, if it's watched, meaning if it's secure, is because if the reason for that is because of yad, because it's no different than your hand, then it could be just like you have to be next to your hand, obviously. Then so to chutzar, you'd also have to be next to your courtyard. The Gemara says not necessarily. Everyone could hold that the reason of chutzar is because it's an extension of your hand. It's for one opinion says just like your hand is just you're close to your hand, so too with regard to your chutzar, you only acquire things in your chutzar if you're present, you're next to the chutzar, next to the courtyard. The idach and the other opinion says if you're going to make such a literal comparison, say, oh, you're next to your hand, might as well say that your hand is attached to you, and your courtyard would have to be attached to you too, which obviously is not the case. Courtyard is not attached to you, and that's not that compare. Even though it's true that you're next to your hand, but that's not the defining feature of your hand. It has to be similar to your hand. Just like your hand is typically watched, i.e., you're typically cognizant of what's in your hand, provided you're not sleeping. Same thing with your courtyard. It has to be a secured courtyard. Once you intentionally secured it, that's sufficient. As opposed to a courtyard that's watched because somebody else is watching it. That is not sufficient to acquire things. He threw it. There was a fellow that threw a divorce to his wife. She was standing in a courtyard. Also, Gita, the divorce, so he threw it and he didn't have good aim, and it landed Bepisla. Okay, what happened? So I guess we'll see in the Gemara in a moment. I'll just sort of give it to you ahead of time. He owned the courtyard, it was his courtyard. Oh. And he said to her, wherever the divorce lands, it's yours. I'm giving it to you. It's your spot. Except the divorce didn't land in the courtyard. It landed on sort of this elevated terrace.
Wooden block.
That's translated as a wooden block. Okay. So now what's the story? Is that sort of the same area or not? If it's 4 amas by 4 amas, so in other words, it's obviously quite a large, it's more like a patio than a block. So then it has its own thing, and we don't know that the guy gave her permission to use his patio. Maybe only gave permission for the courtyard. For Eloi, but if it's smaller than that, so it's not significant. In Chadar Shusi, it's sort of one domain. And therefore, just like he gave her permission to use his domain, he gave her permission to use this mini wooden block, whatever, wooden table thingy, whatever. Okay. What are we talking about? We're talking about her courtyard. Who cares? If it's her courtyard, what's the difference if it fell on a pisla on this big wooden patio or not? It's all hers. Ella what? It's talking about it's his courtyard. Okay. If it's not for amis, what difference does it make? He never gave her permission to use it. Okay, no, he did give her permission. He said to her, I'm lending you the place where the divorce lands. He gave her a place in the courtyard. He didn't give her the patio. Because he didn't specifically mention it, the patio is not included, provided that it's of a reasonable size. It's at least 4 amas by 4 amas. And this is not true. Except that if it's not 10 tefachim high, but let's say it is 10 tefachim high. So if you have this sort of tall thing, it's 10 tefachim high. It's a tall fire hydrant or something that's
monolith.
Yeah, it could be.
10 tefachim, it's 3 feet.
Yeah.
Yeah,
but a tree stump that wasn't cut down to the bottom, something like that. It's not 4 amas, but it's 10 tefachim high. So in that case, that's also considered its own domain, because typically the general rule here is that until 10 tefachim is one domain, above 10 tefachim is a different domain. We talk about having a wall that's 10 tefachim high. We mean to say that the reason why that wall is significant is because it reaches the end of the bottom domain. We consider anything above 10 tefachim to be in a different area. And the way we know this, of course, more in Sukkot, if you remember, where the Shechina comes down, the Shechina doesn't come down below 10 tefachim, which means that there is obviously the divine presence recognizes a separate area above 10 tefachim and below 10 tefachim. That's one component. Obviously, the other component of it is halach l'meshem Sinai. Okay. This is only true if it doesn't have its own importance. So this is sort of like, let's say there was a tree stump that they gave a name to. Everyone knows this is like, this is the tree stump. It has a name to it. Everyone calls it something else. It's used for, it has some sort of its own use. It's called a Shem Levai. Shem Levai means its own notability. If it's notable on its own and it wasn't specifically included in his generous lending of a place where the divorce would land, then it's not included. So this is talking about a place that's insignificant, doesn't have its own name. But it does have its own name. Even if it isn't 10 tefachim high, even if it isn't 4 amas, we don't know that he loaned her that piece of his property. Okay, let's say he throws a divorce into his house, and it lands on the bed that she's sleeping on, or let's say she's awake on. The divorce is not valid because there's no kinyan chotzer. Right? Even if the divorce is with her on the same bed, but because it's his house, the kinyan does not work. Next Gemara, 3 lines in of 78a. This is only true if the bed is his bed. Let's say it's her bed. Then Migareshes, the divorce is valid. Tanya Namihachi, the Bryce says similarly. In his bed, the divorce is not valid. If it's her bed, Migareshes, then the divorce is valid. And we'll explain in a moment. How exactly does this work? No, I guess a good modern example is, let's say I drive my car into your driveway, okay, and somehow something gets into my car and it's something that's worth keeping that I want to keep. It's my car. It's in your driveway. Is there a kinyan of yad in my car when it's in your driveway? Kinyan of chotzer. And this is another big question that comes often in Nizikin. In other words, in a certain sense, maybe I have permission, but who says I have permission to acquire the things that go into it? Maybe I have permission to park my car in there. I don't have permission to acquire stuff that would have otherwise landed in your property. So here also you have her bed in his house. Maybe whatever lands on her bed is not hers because she doesn't necessarily have permission to have her bed there to acquire things. Evidently we see from this statement of Rav that that you do have that the permission that's granted for you to put your stuff there is not merely to put your stuff there, but it's also to allow that if something falls into your stuff, you acquire it. Kind of like the guy who puts his vessels there acquires it. So the Gemara says, her bed is 10 tfachim high. So her bed actually, right to the top of her bed is actually its own domain. It's not even his. He owns only the bottom 10 tfachim. She owns after 10 tfachim. He doesn't own. So if her bed is higher than 10 tfachim, then it works. Okay, hold on a second. Like, what do you mean the bed's not suspending midair? It's not floating on a magic carpet. It's obviously the bed has feet, and the feet are in his property. So what did you accomplish by lifting up the beds? The bed effectively is just an extension of his domain, because he owns the place where you put the frame. You have the frame. The frame is sitting in his domain. So Gemara says So in other words, we presume he allows her to put the bed frame there, especially when it's 10 tfachim high. Then he sort of has some sort of use of underneath the bed. So in that sense, he allows her to keep the bed there, and the fact that the bed is in a different domain means that she could acquire things that fall on the beds. Obviously, if the bed is hers. Okay, if it falls the toicheka or the toichkalasam yiresh, so if he falls into her bosom or into her vessel or kalsa is sort of a basket. I think you might want to say a modern equivalent to that would be like a handbag, something like that. Then it works. Okay, we get to the same problem here, right? Hold on a second. The handbag is in his property. It's kelev shalekach b'shus meicher. It's the vessel of the one acquiring something in the domain of the buyer. She doesn't own the property. Amai, why does the kinyan work? Why does this divorce work? Kelev shalekach b'shus meicher. Rabbi Yehudah Shmuel. So Rabbi Yehudah says in the name of Shmuel, the basket actually wasn't on the floor. It was a handbag thingy. It was hanging from her. So in that case, it's sort of part of her, and it's not it's not in the category of kelev shalekach b'shus meicher. V'chein Amar Belazar, Amar Afaishya, ben shehaisa kalsa tluyaba. Similarly, Rabbi Belazar says in the name of Afaishya, we're talking about a scenario where the basket is hanging from her. Rav Shimon Lakish says, "Kshura af b'she'ena tluya." It could be that it was tied to her, even if it wasn't attached to her. Even if it wasn't hanging, the fact that she tied it to her, that's sufficient enough to be considered on her person as opposed to in his domain. Rabbi Dovid says, the basket was in her bosom, and therefore it's in her domain, and not in and not in the domain of the seller. The explanation here is when it's on you, your physical presence actually, then that's sort of no different than your actual physical presence. Just like if you're in my house and I can give you a gift, and if you pick up the gift, it's yours. Because obviously your hand, I let you be in my property, and even if I didn't let you, I don't know how much of a difference it would make, but my hand still remains my own hand. It's not something that you can say, well, it was only here on condition that you wouldn't acquire things. Your hand is your hand, it's able to acquire. So if it's on her physical presence, that is her hand. And according to two of the answers, we sort of have equivalent of her physical presence. And what is that? That's either if it's tied to her, it's just like if it's hanging from her, or if it's in her bosom, that's also the same thing. Tanya Nami Hachi, the Bryce explains as well. If he throws the divorce into her bosom or into her basket, or anything that's similar, let's say anything that's similar to something like a handbag would be similar to her basket, then the divorce is valid. What is the item similar to the kalsa? The istuye taska, the ochlaba tamri. Now, you mind taking a second? What exactly is a taska? Yeah, it seems to be a sack or a basket. Taska. Fourth to last word before the Mishnah. Pouch. Okay. A pouch, the achaba tamri that they use to eat dates. Apparently, they put the dates in the pouch. I guess that's what she was eating from. So that's sort of a similar thing where it's considered as if it's on her presence. Okay. Very interesting Gemara here. Okay. Amar lo kinsi shtarchayv zeh. He says to her, here's a debt that I owe. If you don't mind, please collect this debt. Or she finds the divorce tucked into his belt behind his back, and she takes the divorce out of his belt, and she looks at it. She's reading the document. Oh, and it's her divorce. The guy was a little sly here. And I get divorce is not valid until he says to her, "Here is your divorce." We'll have to explain this a little more in the Gemara. Let's say he puts it into her hand and she's sleeping. When she wakes up, so she finds she's sleeping, and then she wakes up and there's something in her hand. She opens it up and says, "Wow, it's a divorce." The divorce is not valid until he tells her, "Here is your divorce." Okay. Now, the way I sort of understand the Gemara here is with Taisvis, Madam Taisvis. I'll try to do my best to explain according to Taisvis. I did not find Rashi sufficient enough to understand sort of the mechanistic logic in the Gemara. So I'll explain according to the way I think Taisvis is explaining here. Okay. Let's try to give a few different explanations here. Let's say he takes two witnesses behind the wall, says to him, "Listen, I want to divorce my wife. I'm too embarrassed. I'm not manly enough, and it's one of the guys when they got engaged, he had to point up to the big sign that somebody else put up, "Will you marry me?" Because he couldn't ask himself. So this guy couldn't divorce his wife. He's too embarrassed. So he says to the witnesses, "I'm going to tell her this is a traffic ticket that she got out of the car, put in the red envelope, the orange envelope, and you should know it's a divorce. I really mean to divorce her." And he takes the two witnesses' watch and he gives her the traffic ticket. The halacha is that she is divorced. Okay, hold on. What about the fact he didn't say Hagita? He didn't tell her this is your divorce. Okay, so it doesn't need to be said that this is a divorce. A divorce also has to be given. But those two things don't necessarily have to be the same thing. Or maybe they do according to one opinion, and we'll get to that. So she has to know that she's getting a divorce, but it could be that it doesn't necessarily need to happen at the exact same moment that she's getting the divorce. In other words, you gave her the husband gives her a divorce, tells her it's a debt. Okay, then comes back a few days later and says, "Oh, by the way, Hagita, this is your divorce." Or in the scenario I just told you with the witnesses are going to tell her, "By the way, it wasn't trafficked again. Open up the envelope, something else."
She probably can't read.
What?
She probably can't read.
Could be. It seems that Jews throughout history have never had a problem of illiteracy.
Right.
We've always had illiteracy.
Right.
But rates of literacy were always very, very high. You see what I'm saying? It's not like black. It's not like the
I'm just
not like the Indians where they wouldn't have written language and nobody knew how to read.
Seemed like women didn't get a lot of education.
I don't know.
Maybe they did.
The Gemara says there was a husband who didn't know how to read, and his wife reads for him, right? We had the Gemara in Sukkah. It's toward the end of the fourth part. So I don't know. I don't know either way. But it could be she didn't know how to read, and it could be she had to have somebody else. In this mission, she's clearly reading it on her own.
Yeah.
Right? Mishnah says, Karavi, she's reading and she's finding out. Okay. Okay, now there's another problem. Like we said, you also need to give a divorce. If she pulls the divorce out of his, sort of the divorce is sort of sheathed in his in the back of his pants, and she pulls it out, not gonna work. Not in a Sina, he never gave her the divorce. Let's say he throws the divorce on the floor. Says, by the way, go pick up the traffic ticket. It's the top of your windshield. She pulls up the traffic ticket. She opens it up. Oh, it's divorce. Or for that matter, he says, go pick up the divorce that's underneath your underneath your windshield wiper. It's the same thing. He never gave it to her. Okay, now maybe the windshield wiper is considered her domain because she owns the car. Okay, she doesn't own the car. Okay, it's his car. Rava says, if he tells it to pick up the divorce from the ground, it's not a good kinyan because you need to have an esina, you need to give it. Okay, so the Gemara says, it wasn't on the floor. The divorce was sort of tucked into his pants, so she pulled it out of his pants. Okay, so Gemara says, hold on, she pulled it out. You need him to give it to her. And he didn't give it to her. So Gemara says, it was a combined effort. He sort of swung his hips toward her, and she sees it get tucked into his belt, and she grabs. So he's twisting, and she's grabbing the divorce, and that's sufficient to be in a sina. Tanya Nami Bryce says as well. Amar law kinsi shtar chayvze ayshafasim acharav. He says to her, take this divorce, take this debt. Or she pulls it out of his belt. Karasa, she reads it. It turns out it's her divorce, and again that she unless he says to her, "This is your divorce." Different Rebbe. Okay, very important here. So Rebbe says, at some point in time, it does not need to be at the moment the divorce is given. You need to tell her, by the way, Hagita, this is your divorce. Rav Shimon Elazar says no. No, the giving of the divorce must be accompanied by the words Hagitach. This is your divorce. If he gives her the divorce but doesn't say Hagitach, then she has to give him back the divorce. He gives it to her again and says Hagitach again. And this time the Hagitach is with the giving of the divorce. Now, Rosh Hashanah seems to be quite intuitive. The proclamation that an item should be that letting her know that this is a divorce, theoretically seems to be important enough that it has to accompany the giving of the divorce. And that's why it has to be done at the same moment. Rebbe seems to be the chiddush here. Rebbe seems to be the new idea that really it's two separate things. You just need to notify her that that it is a divorce. Even if it was given first and she's notified later, that works as well. Okay, why is this necessary? Taisus has a very interesting argument. It's the last line of Taisus. Taisus says is this concept. You saw this in the past. If let's say a girl is allowed to get married according to Torah law. Once she's 3 years old, her even younger, really, her father can't get married, but her father can accept kedushin on her behalf. Okay, let's say you need to divorce her, so you can give a divorce to her father. The father accepts the divorce on her behalf. But we noted that there's two types of children. There's children that could be divorced and children that can't be divorced. What's a child that can't be divorced? If she's too young to understand what a divorce is. Sort of, she goes back to, she gets divorced, and the next day she's back in her ex-husband's house because she doesn't understand what that means. Taisus says that same law applies to every woman. And how does it apply? It applies, they need to tell her that this is a divorce. If she doesn't know, effectively she's coming back the next day. But she thinks that her ex-husband, she thinks she's still married to her ex-husband. And the debate here is whether this could be, this is necessary at some point in time after giving the divorce, or it has to be done at the moment the divorce is actually given. Okay. Okay. Nosnu biyada. But halfway through the Gemara, the he Shena Neura Vikaira. First word line is Vaharehu Gita. So she's sleeping. She wakes up. She reads her divorce. Vaharehu Gita. It's a divorce. And I get that she has to tell her this is a divorce. Different Rebbe. This is the opinion of Rebbe. They have to give the divorce again. The Yemer law, and at the next time they give the divorce, he says to her, Hagitach, this is a divorce. With Sricha, okay. This debate is with regard to two scenarios. Number one, where he transferred her, a traffic ticket, and he said, "Here's a traffic ticket." Turns out it's a divorce. And the other scenario is where she's sleeping, and he gives it to him. He gives it to him when she is sleeping. He gives it to her when she is sleeping. Why do I need to know the debate that both Rebbe and Reb Shimon ben Elazar disagree in both scenarios? They're both necessary. Would have just said the scenario of where he gave her the divorce, where she thought it was a traffic ticket. Because she's awake, because she's alert, therefore technically you can give her a divorce. So therefore, even if the statement of Hagitach, here is your divorce, did not accompany the actual giving of the document, it happened later. That's why Rebbe says the divorce is kosher. But if she's sleeping, the where you can't divorce her because she's sleeping, she's not cognizant. Maybe in that case he agrees to Reb Shimon ben Elazar that divorce would not be valid. Would have only said this, so that's why he needs to say the scenario of where she's sleeping. Would have just said the scenario where she's sleeping. I would think Reb Shimon ben Elazar's logic is because she's sleeping. That's the real problem. You can't give her a divorce because she's sleeping. But in a scenario where she's awake, you just told her it's a traffic ticket. Maybe he agrees to Rebbe. So they're both necessary. Rava says, he wrote her a divorce and gave the divorce in the hands of her slave. If the slave is sleeping and she's watching the slave, the divorce is valid. Neir, if the slave is up, and again, it's not a divorce. She's not the one watching the slave, it's the slave that's watching the slave. Okay, hold on. If he's sleeping and she's watching, the divorce is valid. This fellow is a movable chutzner, and a movable courtyard does not acquire. Okay, hold on a second. When he's not movable, he's sleeping, right? Sleeping, he can't move. Oh, it doesn't make a difference. Rava says, since had he been up, he would have been moving effectively because he is a moving person, he's alive. So therefore, even when he's sleeping, it's not he can't acquire. It's considered he's watching himself. In other words, a slave would not be the courtyard in that sense of the master. Because he's watching himself. Now, if the slave acquires it, the master acquires it. But that's different than the slave acquiring something that was put into his hands. Okay, so the Gemara says that's not difficult to help us with kafas. It's talking about where the fellow is bound. He's tied together. See, he's literally immobile. He can't move, so he doesn't have the ability to walk. Therefore, if she's watching him, then the divorce is valid. Okay, says the Mishnah. We'll get to see the Gemara exactly how this happens. For now, there's two people, the husband and the ex-wife, ex-husband, ex-wife, and he throws her divorce. It lands closer to her, she's divorced. Closer to him, not divorced. Mechza, right in the middle, Megarashis for any Megarashis. Suffix get. We don't know. The same thing is true with regard to Kedushin. The same thing is true with regard to debt. We'll explain. What does it mean with regard to debt? The creditor says, throw me your payments. And he threw it to him. If it was close to the creditor, then the creditor acquires the payment and the debt is absolved. If it was close to the lender, then if the robber came in, the thief came in and just intercepted the package and stole it, then the borrower would have to pay back again. So let's say it's right in the middle. Then we don't know what to do. So therefore we say they should split the payment. So you pretend as if he paid back half and still owes the other half, and he has to pay back half the one. Says the Gemara, Karav law. What's the scenario where the divorce is closer to her, or where the divorce is closer to him? Amar Rav. So Rav says the first explanation is Arba Amas Shaloh Zeu Karav law. Arba Amas Shaloh Zeu Karav law. Okay, the typical the operating principle here is that when you're in a public domain, you don't have a right to anything, except that by convention we give you sort of 4 amas, give you 6 feet. It's in the 6 feet you can transact with other people. You can do your own business. You shouldn't be standing in the middle of the road taking up the whole road. So within these 6 feet you're able to acquire things. He throws a divorce within her 6 feet. It belongs to her. Within his 6 feet belongs to him. Okay, so how did it happen? It landed in the middle. They were both standing in one set of arba amas, in one set of 6 feet. Hold on, but let's see So let's see who came first, because the person that came first has a right. The person that came second has no right. They both came at the same moment. Okay, this is another famous Talmudical debate, which is, can things happen at the exact same moment or be at the exact same distance? And there is an opinion that says it's possible, but the halacha is following the opinion that it isn't possible. So it's not possible for two people to acquire the same 4 cubits at the same time. One of them obviously came first. El Omer of Kahana says, now it's interesting. Who really cares? As long as we don't know.
Yeah.
Now, I guess the answer to that probably is because in this case, we probably would use chazaka to resolve the question of who came first. Although that itself is questionable, whether chazaka, because the chazaka is whether or not she's married, not who came first. In other words, so let's go. We don't have time. Okay. Regardless, so obviously somebody came first. Rav Kahana says to get. Okay, so in other words, they're are 4 feet, they're 6 feet apart from each other. So each one has 3 feet of domain. Now it doesn't have to be exactly precise because the divorce takes up some amount of space. Divorce, let's say, is 12 inches, so it's accurate to within a couple of inches. So that works. And the divorce is in between them. The divorce is still attached to him. What does that mean? Because what are we saying? We're saying the divorce is still partially in his domain, partially in her domain. So it's connected to him effectively. It's connected to him. Rabbi Yosef to Amit Sharvayo. Rabbi and Yosef both say, we're talking about where there's 2 sets of witnesses. Achas Ameras Karaf Loy, Achas Ameras Karaf Law. Space that for a second. Again, so if they're equally distant apart and the divorce is in between, the Gemara is saying that can't be a divorce. Why? Because it's still partially in his domain. So what's the solution? We have a contradiction among the witnesses. We're not, in other words, it was in somebody's domain. It was either in hers or his. We just don't know. Why don't we know? Because 2 people say it was in her domain, it was in her 6 feet, and 2 people say it was in his 6 feet. What are we supposed to do? It's a suffix. And therefore, we treat it as a doubt. She's megareshes for any megareshes. Rabbi Yochanan says, Karav lo shenino. I feel 1 second. Okay. Rabbi Yochanan says, Karav lo shenino afilu me'ama. Close to her means even 100 amas, 150 feet. The Karav lo shenino afilu me'ama. Close to him, even 150 feet. Okay. Hekidami. Mechza machza. So what is exactly is a scenario of mechza machza, half and half. I'll explain to you what Rabbi Yochanan means to say. If he can watch the divorce from 150 feet away and she can't, that's close to him. If she could watch it but he can't, then the divorce is closer to her. If both of them could watch it or both of them can't watch it, that is half and half. Okay, so I'll explain this. Let's say, for example, they're in a forest. Okay, in the forest, presumably, no man's land, they both can watch it. If they both could watch the divorce, it's in between them, that's mechza. Hold on a second. Now let's put a river in between. Okay, actually 50 feet away from her, 300 feet away from him, but there's a river between her and the divorce. That's not going to work. That divorce is actually closer to her, but it's really closer to him. Because he could watch it from 300 feet away, and she can't because there's a river in between. The same thing.
Take care.
Prevent anybody else from taking the place, which is it's in a forest, it's public property, but it's not a public thoroughfare. So everyone really is allowed to camp out there. So that, they both can bring their guns or whatever else they need, dogs, and they can watch the document. Matzah is where they both can watch it, they both can't watch it. The rabbi said this in front of Rabbi Yochanan in the name of Rabbi Yonasan. This is what he said. Yadin chavrin bavloi lefusha kihaitama. The Babylonians, Rabbi Yonasan apparently moved from Bavel to Israel. And Rabbi Yochanan was impressed that those in Bavel were able to figure out this Mishnah on their own. We learned this as well in the Brisa. Rabbi Eliezer says, "Kol shukar of law, kar of law milai." It's closer to her than to him. Uba kelav enoughlai ain't migrashes. 1 second. Okay, so it's close to her. Then a dog comes and consumes it. She's not divorced. Hold on, the Gemara says 1 second. 1 second. If the divorce is close to her, then she should be divorced. Does a woman have to watch divorce the rest of his life? No, she doesn't. In other words, once she's divorced, she's divorced. She doesn't have to watch it. So who cares if a dog comes afterwards? It's irrelevant. It was close to her. It must be. This is what the Brisa means to say. Kol shekar of law milai. If it was closer to her than to him, however, so it's closer to her, right? It's 100 feet away from her, and it's 300 feet away from him. However, if a dog comes along, she can't do anything about it. Why? Because it's on the other side of a river. So therefore, that's considered close to him, and therefore, she's not divorced. Shmuel said to Rabbi Yehudah, "Shinna, sharp one, in order for the divorce to be valid, it has to be close enough to her that she can bend over and pick it up. Not only that, but you should never remarry a woman or proclaim a woman's divorce until divorce actually gets to her hands." There was actually a story. Rav Mordechai said to Rav Ashi, there was such a story. The guy threw the divorce. It landed at her feet. She bent down and picked it up, presumably. And then her husband died. The rabbi said you require chalitza. They required chalitza because it didn't get into her hands before he passed away. And ultimately, the practical halacha here is that it would have to get into her hands. Okay.